2 weeks after my son's wedding, the photographer called me and said, "Ma'am, I noticed something terrible. Come immediately and don't say anything to your son. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are watching from in the comments." The phone rang while I was elbow-deep in bread dough. Wednesday morning. Kitchen smelling of yeast and rosemary. Rain tapping softly against the window above the sink. The kind of quiet morning I'd built for myself across 43 years of early rising, of kneading and baking and finding peace in my hands working something real. I almost didn't answer. I was 71 years old. I had earned the right to ignore a ringing phone when my hands were covered in flour. But something made me wipe my palms on my apron. Something made me pick up. "Mrs. Calloway?" The man's voice was careful, measured, like someone choosing each word before releasing it. "This is Dominic Reyes. I photographed your son's wedding 2 weeks ago." My chest softened immediately. Marcus's wedding. The most beautiful day of my life, watching my only son stand at that altar, watching him smile the way he used to smile as a boy when something truly delighted him. "Of course," I said warmly. "Dominic, the photographs were stunning. I've been meaning to call you and—" "Mrs. Calloway," he stopped me, gently but firmly. "I need to see you in person, today if possible. Please come alone, and please, I'm asking you sincerely, don't mention this call to Marcus." The kitchen went very still around me. The rain kept tapping the window. The bread dough sat waiting on the counter. Everything looked exactly the same as it had 30 seconds ago. But the air had changed. "What did you find?" I asked. "I can't explain over the phone, but I found something in the photographs, Mrs. Calloway. Something I believe you need to see before anyone else does." I gripped the edge of the counter. "What kind of something?" "Please, my studio is on Meridian Street downtown. If you can come this afternoon, I'll show you everything. Come alone." From the living room, I heard the television flick on. Volume high, the way it always was when Devin was in there. Devin, my son's new brother-in-law, who had appeared in my house 6 days after the wedding, dragging a single duffel bag and a mountain of entitlement. "Just a few weeks," Krista had said. "His apartment fell through. You have the space, Margaret." I looked at the living room doorway. "I'll be there," I said quietly into the phone. Dominic exhaled slowly. "Thank you, and Mrs. Calloway, I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry I have to be the one to do this." He hung up. I stood with the phone pressed to my chest, staring at my bread dough, listening to Devin laugh at something on my television, in my living room, with my remote control on my couch in my house. Something very serious in the photographs. "Margaret." Krista appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her silk pajamas at 11 in the morning, coffee cup in hand, helping herself to my good coffee beans the way she'd been helping herself to everything since she arrived with Marcus 4 months ago. Temporarily asterisk, she'd said then too. Just until we find the perfect place. They had been married 2 weeks. They were still here. "Devin needs the car this afternoon," Krista announced, not asked. Announced. "He has a thing downtown. Can you take a taxi or something if you're going out?" I looked at my daughter-in-law. 34 years old, Krista Vane Holloway, now Krista Calloway. Her family owned 3 car dealerships in the county, but she didn't work. She managed, she explained, when I'd once gently asked about her plans. "I manage things, Margaret. Not everyone is meant to clock in somewhere." "We'll work something out," I said evenly. "Great," she turned and walked back to the living room. I heard her settle onto my couch, heard her murmur something to Devin, heard them both laugh. I turned back to my bread dough and pressed my fists into it, hard. I drove my own car downtown. Nobody took my keys. Nobody managed me. I was 71 years old and I had buried a husband and raised a son alone and built a 20-year career as a secondary school librarian, and I drove myself wherever I pleased. The rain had stopped by the time I found Dominic's studio on Meridian Street, a narrow brick building wedged between a print shop and a florist, his name on a simple wooden sign beside the door. He met me on the threshold. Mid-30s, dark eyes, the kind of careful face that didn't let much through unless he allowed it. But I could see the strain in his jaw. The way he held the door open just a moment longer than necessary, like he was giving himself one last chance to reconsider. "Mrs. Calloway, thank you for coming." He stepped back to let me in. The studio smelled of ink and something faintly chemical. Beautiful photographs lined every wall. Weddings, children, families caught in honest moments. The light was soft and northern. "Please," he said, "through here." He led me to a back room, editing suite. Large monitor, professional equipment, portfolios stacked on a shelf. A single chair positioned in front of the screen. He didn't sit. He stood beside the monitor, hands clasped in front of him, and looked at me with those careful eyes. "I need you to understand something before I show you anything," he said. "I debated this for 10 days. I almost didn't call. But I kept thinking, if this were my mother, what would I want someone to do? And the answer was always the same." "Show me," I said. He nodded once and turned to his keyboard. The screen filled with images from Marcus's wedding. The ceremony at the vineyard, all that golden afternoon light. My son's face when he first saw Krista coming down the aisle. I remembered standing in the front row watching him, watching his eyes fill, and thinking that whatever doubts I'd carried about this woman, this was real for him. This was true. "These are the ceremony shots," Dominic said quietly, "what everyone saw." He clicked to a different folder. "These are from 3 hours before the ceremony. I arrived early to scout angles, test the light in the main hall. I was working in the corridor that runs behind the private suites." He clicked again. The image that appeared on the screen made the room tilt. I put my hand on the edge of his desk. Krista, my son's bride in her dressing gown, hair not yet done, makeup half finished. Standing in an alcove off the corridor with a man I didn't recognize. Tall, dark-suited, not a member of the wedding party. Not anyone I'd seen that day or any day before. She had both hands on his face. He had his forehead pressed to hers. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't a greeting or a goodbye. It was the body language of two people who knew each other in a way that had nothing to do with the ceremony about to take place 50 meters away. "How long before the wedding?" My voice was someone else's voice, measured, dry, from a very long distance. 3 hours, the metadata is exact. Dominic pulled up a technical panel beside the image. Timestamps, file information, GPS coordinates. I was adjusting exposure settings. I captured this accidentally through the corridor window. I didn't realize what I had until I was editing 2 days later. "There are more." He clicked forward without speaking. There were more. Different angles, same alcove, same two people. In one, the man's hand was visible, pressed flat against the stone wall beside Krista's head. In another, they were talking, close, her chin tilted up, his expression intent, like a man reminding himself of something important. "Do you know who he is?" I asked. Dominic hesitated. I ran a reverse image search. "His name is Garrett Ashby. He's a property developer based in the city." He paused. "I also found, through public records, that he and Krista Vane Holloway were listed together on a planning application filed 18 months ago. They co-owned a development property in the Eastern District." Another pause. "The property was sold 6 months ago. I don't know what the arrangement was." I straightened slowly, my knees held. I was grateful for that. Co-owned a property, filed together, 18 months ago. Before she met Marcus. During the time she was, presumably, already with Marcus. "She and my son have been together for 2 years, I said. "Yes," Dominic said quietly. I looked at the screen. Krista's hands on a man's face, 3 hours before promising my son forever. "Can you prove the timestamps, beyond any question?" Yes, he was already pulling up the technical documentation. "This is forensic-level evidence. File metadata, GPS coordinates, timestamp down to the second. The corridor location matches the venue floor plan exactly. I can print all of it," or, he reached into his desk and produced a small drive. Silver, smaller than my thumb. "Everything is on here. All the photographs, all the technical data, a written summary of the file information. I've made 2 copies." He held it out. I looked at it for a moment, such a small thing. I took it. "You did the right thing," I said. "I hope so." His voice was rough. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Calloway, I genuinely am." "Don't be sorry for telling the truth." I stood, smoothed my coat, put the drive carefully in my purse. "Be sorry for the person who made it necessary." The drive home passed in that particular silence, that follows something enormous. I drove carefully, checked my mirrors, used my indicators, observed every rule of the road, because when the world tilts on its axis, some part of the brain reaches for anything that feels controllable. Garrett Ashby, property developer, co-owned a property with Krista Vane Holloway. Why marry Marcus at all? The question turned slowly in my mind, the way a stone turns in river water. Patient, persistent, wearing smooth everything it touched. My son was a successful architect. His firm was well regarded, growing. He had a good income, excellent prospects, a name that meant something in this city because his father had built it to mean something before he died. He also had me. And I had the house on Aldermere Lane that my husband Gerald had designed himself 40 years ago, that had been featured in 2 architectural journals, that sat on a corner plot in the most desirable street in the neighborhood, that the estate agent next door had twice slid unsolicited letters through my letterbox offering extraordinary sums for. The house that Marcus was now living in with his wife, temporarily. Just until we find the perfect place, Margaret. I pulled into my driveway. Through the living room window, I could see the blue flicker of the television. I sat in my car for exactly 3 minutes, looking at my house. Then I went inside. That evening, I heated vegetable soup from a batch I'd made Sunday and ate it at the kitchen table alone. From the living room, Devon's voice competed with the television. He was on the phone, loud and cheerful, telling someone about his week as though his week contained anything to report. He'd arrived 12 days ago with his duffel bag and his easy grin and his complete lack of apparent awareness that he was a grown man of 32 sleeping on his sister's mother-in-law's sofa. From upstairs, I could hear Krista and Marcus talking. Low voices, occasional laughter. My son's laughter. Genuine, warm, the same laugh he'd had since he was 8 years old. Something in my chest compressed. I thought about the photographs. Krista's hands on that man's face. The timestamp, 3 hours. The easy familiarity of 2 people who had history, who had secrets, who had plans. And then I thought about something else. The conversation at dinner last month, 3 weeks before the wedding. Krista had mentioned, casually between bites, that her family's solicitor had recommended updating my own estate documents. At your age, Margaret, it's just sensible planning. I can put you in touch with him. He specializes in transfers, making sure assets go where you intend. I had smiled and said I'd think about it. I'd thought it was concern. Now I was thinking other things entirely. I washed my bowl, dried it, placed it back in the cupboard, and went to my study. My husband's old desk, oak, scarred with years of use, his architectural drawings still framed on the wall above it. This house, sketched in his hand, signed with his initials. I sat down and opened my laptop. I searched for a name I'd heard years ago at a community meeting. Patricia Hulst, solicitor, estate planning and property law. Her firm's website described 30 years of practice, specializing in asset protection, trust law, tenancy disputes. She had an opening on Thursday morning. I booked it. Then I sat back and looked at Gerald's drawings on the wall, and I talked to him the way I still sometimes did, quietly, without expectation of answer. I think something terrible has been happening under our roof, I told him, and I think I've been too willing to believe the best of people to see it clearly. The house was quiet except for the television downstairs and the ordinary sounds of people who had made themselves comfortable in a space that wasn't theirs. I turned off my desk lamp and went to bed. I lay in the dark and did not sleep for a very long time. Thursday came slowly. I told no one where I was going. When Krista appeared in the kitchen at 8:30 and asked if I'd be home for lunch, I said I had errands and kept my voice pleasant and my eyes clear. She looked at me for just a half-second longer than necessary. "All right," she said. "Devon needs the printer today, by the way, his CV or something. Hope that's fine." "Of course," I said. I left before she could say anything else. Patricia Hulst's office was above a bookshop on the high street. Dark wood paneling, shelves of legal volumes, the particular smell of a room where serious things had been decided for decades. She was small, silver-haired, with reading glasses on a chain and eyes that had heard everything and were surprised by nothing. She listened without interrupting. I told her all of it. The photographs, the timestamps, the co-owned property, the overheard comment about estate planning, Devin on my sofa, Krista and Marcus still in my house with no departure date discussed. When I finished, she removed her glasses and polished them with a cloth. "Let me understand the living situation clearly," she said. "Your son and his wife have been residing in your property for 4 months. Since shortly after they began seriously dating, yes. Marcus said it made sense while they were saving. Is there any written agreement, any lease, any formal arrangement?" "No." "Have any payments been made to you? Rent, contribution to bills, anything documented?" I thought about this carefully. Krista once bought groceries, perhaps twice. Marcus occasionally puts petrol in my car without being asked. Patricia wrote notes in her small, precise hand. And the brother-in-law. "Devin, he's been here 12 days. No discussion of duration, no contribution of any kind." "Mrs. Calloway, in terms of your legal position, you are in a strong place. Without any tenancy agreement, these individuals are guests. Your home is your property. You have the right to request that guests leave, and if they refuse, legal removal is straightforward and well supported by law." Something loosened in my ribcage, just slightly, just enough to breathe a little more easily. "And my estate?" I asked. "I've not reviewed my will in some years." "Then we should do so immediately." She pulled a fresh pad toward her. "There are protective structures available to you. A properly constructed trust places your assets beyond the reach of challenges or manipulation after your death. More importantly, it signals clearly and legally where your wishes stand." She looked at me steadily. "Mrs. Calloway, I want to say something plainly, because I think you're a woman who appreciates directness." "Very much. What you've described, the photographs, the connection to this Ashby person, the interest in your estate documents, the positioning of family members in your home without formal arrangement, these things do not individually constitute proof of wrongdoing. But together, they suggest that you are surrounded by people who have calculated your vulnerability and are managing their proximity to you accordingly." She paused. "That is not family, that is strategy." I looked at the legal volumes, lining her walls. "That is not family, that is strategy." 43 years I'd been a mother. 34 years a wife. 20 years a librarian. I had spent my entire adult life reading people accurately enough to recommend the right books, to know which child needed encouragement and which needed boundaries, to understand the difference between someone who was lost and someone who was unkind. How had I let myself stop reading clearly when it mattered most? "Tell me what we need to do," I said. She smiled then, for the first time, small and certain. "Let's start with the trust documents." The days after my meeting with Patricia moved like water finding its level. Quiet, inevitable, impossible to stop once it began. Day 1, Patricia's office sent preliminary trust documents. I read every page at my desk with Gerald's architectural drawings above me and a cup of tea at my elbow. Day 3, Devin blocked my path in the kitchen doorway. Not dramatically, not deliberately perhaps, but his body occupied the space in a way that required me to squeeze past him to reach my own kettle. "Margaret," he said, not Mrs. Calloway asterisk, never Mrs. Calloway asterisk, though he'd known me for 4 months. "Krista was thinking, this room would actually get much better light if you took down that shelf unit. Makes the whole space feel bigger." I looked at the shelf unit. Gerald had built it. I'd watched him do it, measured and leveled it on a Saturday afternoon 31 years ago. "I like the shelf unit," I said. Devin shrugged, just a thought. "Krista has a good eye for these things." "I'm sure she does," I said and made my tea. Day 5, I was in the garden early, before anyone was awake, turning the soil in the vegetable bed that Gerald and I had built together, when I heard Krista's voice through the kitchen window. She was on the phone, tone light and satisfied, words carrying clearly through the morning air. The old lady's attached to it, obviously, but give it a few more months. People her age, they reach a point where the house is just too much. All we need to do is be present and patient, and eventually she'll see sense and want to simplify. At that point, Marcus will naturally be the one to help her make decisions. A pause. "No, she'd never sell outright if she thought it was our idea. It has to seem like it's hers. That's the whole point." Another pause and then a laugh, light and bright. Marcus, he'll do whatever we agree is best. He always does. He trusts me completely. I remained crouched in the soil. My hands were still. The trowel rested quietly in the earth. Above me, the apple tree my husband had planted the year Marcus was born cast its familiar shadow across the garden. He trusts me completely. I thought of my son's face at the altar, that boy's smile in a man's body. I stood slowly and went inside through the back door, past the kitchen where Krista was still talking, and directly to my study. I sat at Gerald's desk and wrote down everything I'd heard, word for word, the way I'd been trained to notice things. The way a good librarian, a good reader of people and situations, notices and records and does not let memory soften what was real. Then I picked up the phone and called Patricia. "I need to accelerate everything," I said. "I thought you might," she said. "Come in tomorrow." Friday morning, Patricia's office, documents spread across the conference table like a map of everything I'd built and everything I intended to protect. The trust papers were clear and comprehensive. Primary residence transferred to trust management. My small investment portfolio included. The modest savings Gerald and I had accumulated across 4 decades included. "Upon your death," Patricia said, reading through the distribution clause, "Marcus receives the family photographs, your husband's design library, and the specific items you've listed here. The house and its value transfer to the Children's Literacy Foundation you've named. Your savings, divided between the 2 charities you've selected. And if he contests it, an irrevocable trust, established while you are clearly of sound mind, acting freely, documented thoroughly, is extraordinarily difficult to overturn. His wife even more so. They would need to prove undue influence or incapacity, and we will make sure the documentation demonstrates the opposite." Patricia looked at me over her glasses. "This is your life's work, Mrs. Calloway. You're entitled to decide where it goes." I signed where she indicated, steadily, page by page. "Now," Patricia said, closing the folder, "the tenancy situation." She slid a single document across the table. Formal, legal, headed clearly. "Notice to vacate, residential property, Aldermere Lane. 2 copies, one for your son and his wife, one for the brother-in-law, 30 days from the date of service. No lease, no legal claim. They are guests and the visit has concluded." I picked up the pen. "Mrs. Calloway," Patricia said, "once you serve these, there's no quiet way back. They will understand that you know something. They will react." "I know. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about Krista's voice through the kitchen window. All we need to do is be present and patient. I thought about the photographs. Krista's hands on another man's face, 3 hours before she promised my son forever. I thought about Devin on my sofa, rearranging my space, managing my resources, existing in my home as though tenure were simply a matter of waiting me out. I thought about Marcus, my son, who trusted his wife completely, who deserved the truth, even though it would hurt him. "Yes," I said. I signed both notices. Sunday evening. I cooked a proper dinner. Roast chicken, roasted vegetables, a good loaf of bread from a recipe I'd made for 40 years. I set the table in the dining room, the formal one, with the good china and the cloth napkins and the tall candles Gerald's sister had given me the Christmas before she died. I invited them all. Marcus, Krista, Devin, family dinner asterisk, I'd said, I'd like us all to eat together properly. They came with their performances already in place. I could see it the moment they settled around my table. Krista warm and complimentary about the food, Devin helpful, clearing space for dishes he'd never once cleared before. Marcus grateful, a little guilty, the way kind people are guilty when they've been taking something for granted. We ate. I asked Marcus about his current project. He talked about it with genuine enthusiasm, gesturing with his fork the way he always did when he was excited. I watched him and felt the usual complicated love, the thing that doesn't diminish no matter what happens around it. Then Krista shifted gears. I felt it before she spoke, the way the room's energy tilted slightly. "Margaret, we've been thinking, this house, it's a lot for one person. All this maintenance, the garden, the upkeep, it's a big responsibility." Devin nodded supportively, very practiced. "Marcus and I have been looking at what options might make sense. If you decided to simplify, downsize a little, we'd be so happy to help manage that process. Take all the stress off you. Marcus looked slightly uncomfortable, but he didn't contradict her. I set down my fork. I looked at Krista for a long moment, then at Devin, then at my son. Marcus, I said quietly, I need to show you something after dinner. Just you and I. Something moved in Krista's eyes, quick, controlled, but there. Of course, Marcus said, puzzled but unconcerned. We finished the meal. I cleared the plates. Devin offered to wash up, which was the first time in 12 days he'd offered anything, and I thanked him and said I'd manage. Then I asked Krista and Devin if they'd give Marcus and me a few minutes privately. Krista's smile didn't waver. Of course, Devin and I will watch something in the other room. She was performing to the last. I recognized it clearly now. I sat across from my son at the cleared dining table and placed Dominic's envelope in front of him. A photographer found these while editing the wedding pictures, I said. He called me last week. He came to me because he didn't know what else to do. Marcus looked at the envelope. What is it? Photographs taken 3 hours before your wedding. I watched him open it. Watched his face move through confusion, then recognition of Krista, then understanding of what he was seeing. Watched the understanding become something else, something I couldn't name, that a mother watches happen to her child and cannot prevent. He looked at every photograph. He read the timestamps. He looked at the metadata sheet Dominic had included. Then he set it all down and stared at the table. Who is he? His voice was very quiet. A property developer named Garrett Ashby. He and Krista co-owned a development property together. They sold it 6 months ago. Marcus was silent. Marcus, I put my hand over his, there's more. I told him about the kitchen window, word for word what I'd heard. I showed him my written notes, the exact transcript I'd made while it was fresh, dated, timed. He read it twice. Then he looked up at me. And for a moment he was 8 years old again, looking at me across a kitchen table after something had broken that he hadn't known could break. She's been planning this, he said, not a question. I believe so, yes. He was quiet for a very long time. I need to think, he said finally. I know. I need to, he stopped, ran a hand through his hair. Mum, I don't know what. You don't need to decide anything tonight, I said, but you needed to know. He nodded slowly, stood, looked at the photograph still on the table. I'm going to go upstairs, he said. I need a little while. Of course. He paused at the doorway. Thank you, he said without turning around, for telling me. I know that wasn't easy. None of this is easy, I said, but you're my son, and you deserve the truth. He went upstairs. I sat at my table for a little while, listening to the house. Then I stood, straightened the cloth napkins, and went to the living room doorway. Krista and Devin looked up from the sofa. She had her phone in her hand. Of course she did. I placed 2 envelopes on the coffee table, one addressed to both their names, one to Devin alone. These are formal notices to vacate, I said. You have 30 days to make other arrangements. Krista's expression broke for just a second, the first completely real thing I'd seen on her face. Then it rearranged itself. Margaret, this is legal, I said, and final. There is no lease. There is no agreement. You are guests and the visit has ended. You can't possibly, Devin started. I can, I said. I have 30 days. I walked back to the kitchen and put the kettle on. Behind me, I heard their urgent whispers begin. The sound of people discovering that the plan has changed, that the patient waiting strategy has encountered something patient waiting cannot overcome. I made my tea. I sat at my kitchen table, under the shelf unit Gerald had built with his own hands 31 years ago. I had 30 days until they were gone. I had already protected everything else. The days that followed were a particular education in the nature of desperation. Day 4, Krista knocked on my study door. She came in without waiting for an answer, which was, I supposed, consistent. Margaret, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Her voice was carefully calibrated, concerned, reasonable, with just enough hurt underneath to suggest sincerity. Whatever you think you saw, whatever you think you heard, I want you to understand that Garrett is an old colleague. Nothing more. I should have mentioned him, I know that now. It looks bad. I understand that, but Marcus and I are solid. We are genuinely building a life together. I looked at her. And the property you co-owned with him. A very small pause, invisible to someone not looking for it. A professional investment. Years ago, it ended badly actually. That's why I didn't mention it. And what I heard through the kitchen window. Krista's eyes didn't flinch, but something rearranged behind them. You misheard or misunderstood the context. I would never. I wrote it down immediately, I said. While it was fresh, word for word, date, time, your voice, what you said, it's documented. She was silent. Krista, I said, I am an old woman who spent 20 years as a librarian. My entire career was built on accurate reading and careful documentation. I did not mishear. She looked at me for a long moment. The notices stand, I said, 26 days. She left without speaking. Day 8, Devon appeared in the garden while I was pruning. He stood at a safe distance, affecting casualness, hands in his pockets. Margaret, look, I know things are tense. I know Krista and you have got some issues right now. But I want you to know I've got nothing to do with any of that. I'm just family, right? I'm just Krista's brother. I've been trying to give you space. I continued pruning. I was wondering, he continued, if we couldn't maybe negotiate on my situation separately. I mean, Krista and Marcus, that's their thing, but I could pay rent. Proper rent, whatever's fair. I'd be a really good tenant, honestly. I snipped a wayward branch. 22 days, I said. Day 12. A woman rang my doorbell who introduced herself as a family counselor, sent, she said, by Marcus and Krista, who were concerned about me. She used the words stress response and reactive decision-making and understandable anxiety in older adults facing change. I thanked her for her time. I told her she'd been misinformed about the nature of the situation. I closed the door. But through all of it, through every maneuver and manipulation and attempted negotiation, there was something else happening too. Marcus, my son, who had gone upstairs that Sunday evening with the photographs and his silence, who had not come back down until the following morning, who had looked at me across the kitchen with eyes that were red-edged and steady at the same time. The way a person looks when they have cried everything out and are working out who they are on the other side of it. I spoke to her, he said. I asked her directly. I waited. She didn't deny it, not exactly. She said Garrett was complicated, that it was over, that the wedding had been real. He paused. I'm not sure I believe her. Marcus. I know, he said quietly. I know, Mum. He sat at the kitchen table where he'd eaten breakfast as a boy, and I made him toast the way I always had. Because sometimes the most important thing you can offer someone is the ordinary comforting fact of a person who has always loved you making you toast. I've spoken to someone, he said after a while, a solicitor, about my options. I sat across from him. I think I'm going to need some time, he said, to figure out what's real and what isn't. He looked up at me. Is there any chance, while I figure this out, is there any chance I could stay? Just me. I know it hasn't been fair, the way we've been living here. I understand if you need the space. Of course, I said. You are always welcome in this house, Marcus, you know that. He nodded, looked at his toast. She told me about the notice, he said. She's very angry. I know. She says you've been planning this for a while, that you never accepted her. I thought about how to answer that honestly. I had concerns, I said carefully, about several things. I kept them to myself for too long because I didn't want to be that mother-in-law. I didn't want to see what I was seeing. I paused. That was my mistake, not the concerns themselves. Marcus was quiet. I love you, I said. Whatever happens with Krista, whatever you decide, I love you and I am on your side. That has never changed and it never will. He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. For a few minutes, we just sat like that, in the kitchen where he'd grown up, with the shelf unit his father had built, and the apple tree outside the window, and the ordinary, extraordinary fact of a mother and her child finding each other again through something difficult. The 30th day. I had arranged it, as Patricia advised, with proper formality. Patricia's car arrived at 9. The letting agent from her firm joined us, a witness to the proceedings, a precaution against dispute. I knocked on the guest room door at 9:15. Devon opened it. He had his bag already packed, which surprised me. He looked at me and then at the two women standing in the hallway behind me, and something in him seemed to deflate. "All right," he said quietly. "All right, I'm going." He carried his bag downstairs, past the living room where Marcus sat reading, past the kitchen where I'd made breakfast for everyone this final morning, and out through the front door. He paused on the step. "For what it's worth," he said without looking back, "I did actually like it here." He went to his car and drove away. Krista was another matter. She came downstairs 40 minutes later in full composition. Perfect hair, tailored coat, her luggage in matching sets. I'd never noticed until now because I hadn't wanted to think about what matching luggage in a guest room implied about permanency of intention. She looked at me, then at Patricia, then at Marcus, who had come to stand in the hallway. "Marcus," she said, not to me, to him, "this is not too late, we can work this out." Marcus looked at his wife. He looked at her for a long time with his architect's eyes that had always been good at seeing what was really there beneath the surface of a thing. "The solicitor will be in touch," he said quietly. Krista's composure held perfectly. "I hope you're both very proud of yourselves," she said to the hallway in general. She picked up her matching bags and walked out the front door. Patricia handled the formal paperwork with the letting agent on my doorstep, documents signed and witnessed, the eviction formally concluded. Marcus and I stood in the hallway after they'd driven away. The house was quiet. Actually, genuinely quiet for the first time in 4 months. "Mum," Mark said. "Yes." "I'm sorry for all of it, for not seeing what was happening, for trusting too easily." "You loved her," I said. "That's not a flaw." "I should have listened to you. Early on, when you had concerns, I should have." "Marcus," I touched his arm. "We are going to make you some lunch, and we are going to sit in the garden, and we are not going to spend today in regret. There is enough time for processing and regret later. Right now, I want to sit with my son in my garden." He looked at me, and after a moment, he smiled. The real one, the one from when he was 8 years old. "Yeah," he said, "all right, that sounds good." 6 weeks later. The vegetable bed was doing well. Tomatoes coming up nicely, the courgettes outrunning themselves as courgettes always do, the lettuce needing to be cut back before it bolted. I sat on the garden bench Gerald and I had chosen together on a rainy Saturday, 35 years ago, at a salvage yard on the edge of town, and I drank my morning coffee and I listened to the birds. Marcus was in the house. He was staying for a while, properly this time, genuinely temporarily this time, while things with Krista were sorted through the solicitors. He was not hiding from me. He was not managing me. He was my son, living in his childhood home, eating breakfast in the kitchen in the morning and asking what I needed from the shops, and occasionally sitting with me in the garden to talk about nothing in particular, the way people who genuinely belong to each other talk. The divorce was proceeding. The co-owned property with Garrett Ashby had, it emerged, been rather more significant than Krista had represented. Her solicitor had produced documents. His solicitor had responded with documents. The marriage had indeed, as the photographs suggested, been entered into with something other than pure intention. How it would resolve, I didn't know. That was for the courts and the solicitors and Marcus and Krista to determine. What I knew was my own house. My trust finalized and filed. My life restructured around what was true and what mattered. My phone rang. Dominic Reyes, his name on the screen. "Good morning," I said. "Mrs. Calloway." He sounded lighter than he had the day in his studio. "I hope I'm not calling too early." "Not at all, I'm in the garden." "I've been meaning to call for a few weeks. I kept wondering how things had resolved, whether you were all right." "Things are resolving," I said, "slowly in the ways these things resolve, but yes, I'm all right." "I'm glad." A pause. "I also wanted to say something I perhaps didn't say clearly enough that day. I've photographed a lot of weddings. I've seen a lot of people at the most important moments of their lives. That day in my studio, watching you look at those photographs, the way you held yourself, I've thought about it. You were very brave." I looked at the apple tree, Gerald's apple tree, still producing every September, still standing. I'm not sure it was bravery, I said. I think it was simply deciding that I'd been quiet for long enough. He was quiet for a moment. There's a photography exhibition opening next month. I have some work in it. I know it's an unusual thing to ask, but would you like to come? I think you'd enjoy it, and well, I'd like someone there who understands what photographs can hold. I smiled at the garden. I think I'd like that very much, I said. After we hung up, I sat for a little while longer in the morning light. This was my life. This garden, this bench, this coffee, this house that Gerald had drawn into existence and that I had kept standing through everything that had come since. My son inside, finding his way back to himself. An exhibition to attend next month. A vegetable bed that needed attention. A guitar I'd bought 2 weeks ago on a whim because I'd always meant to learn and there was finally time. They had thought I was simply an old woman with a valuable property and no particular ability to see what was happening around me. They had been wrong on every count. I finished my coffee. I set the mug on the bench beside me. I picked up my gardening gloves and went to see about the courgettes. If this story moved you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. To watch the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you so much for watching.